Do you like retellings and rehashed content? Well, if you're a Dragon Ball Super fan, it has just what you're looking for, in both anime and manga format too. If that is your thing, then 2023 was a wonderful year for you, and if not, well, it probably sucked. It was a year of absolute despair for fans of the Dragon Ball Super Manga. These tumultuous events had fans begging on a monthly basis for change, clinging on to the hope that the next chapter would bring the current story being told to a close. This was a year marked by controversy and a lack of interest, as the norm of the monthly Dragon Ball Super Manga chapters that generated so much buzz and discussion derived from the new content it was producing came to a sudden halt with the end of the Granola arc and the beginning of the Dragon Ball Super Superhero arc. It proved to be a detrimental decision, as it resulted in an overall lack of interest in the product, as many felt that the manga was in a state of purgatory. But why was each chapter met with so much disinterest, and why was the year-long wait for the arc to end so grueling? My name is Shambazard. Join me as I break down and explore what made the entire calendar year of 2023 so horrible for the Dragon Ball Super Manga. Don't forget to hit the like button, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button, as it helps the video grow and it helps the channel grow. Thank you for your support. When the Dragon Ball Super anime ended in 2018, while it was heartbreaking to many fans, it was beneficial to the likes of the manga. The animated medium has a greater reach than the manga medium does, so naturally more people, mainly the casual audience, turn to the Dragon Ball Super anime for their Dragon Ball fix. But with the lack of the anime and the story continuing on nonetheless to the manga, many people who were anime only at the time no doubt turned towards the manga to keep up with the story. With no anime, the manga became the only source for new Dragon Ball content. During the anime's run, the manga was overshadowed and behind the anime, so people had far less interest in it due to knowing where the story was going. The most interesting aspect of it at the time was examining the differences in the story Toyotaro and Toriyama made in contrast to the anime, such as Super Saiyan Goku Black being a manga-only inclusion as an example. But with no anime and the manga entering unknown territory past the Universal Survival and Broly arcs, people were excited for the new content to come every month. This is the main reason why the manga benefited from no anime. It put more eyes and readers on the product. Over the last several years, the manga has continued to tell a variety of new stories in the likes of the Moro and Granola arcs, with people tuning in monthly to read the new chapter and speculation and discussions being had in between chapters, similar to how it took place in between weekly Dragon Ball Super episodes for the anime. Despite this, people have still clamored for the anime to return to see some of their favorite manga moments in an animated format, which to many is their preferred method of entertainment, a similar reason as to why Dragon Ball Daima received lots of backlash upon its announcement. The aspect of new and unseen content is also what made Dragon Ball Super Superhero so exciting for fans to go see. As the manga was unfolding the events of the Granola arc, this movie featured a new unseen story that hadn't taken place in the manga, which worked to its benefit due to it being completely unseen upon its release. But this phenomenon that proved so successful for the movie proved to be greatly detrimental to the manga. Once the Granola arc concluded, it was revealed that the superhero arc took place after it. It had been unknown the time placement of the story due to lack of info being provided regarding the timeline in the movie and manga events not being referenced. But when it was revealed that the manga would be turning towards the superhero arc, it was met with skepticism. Many people expected the manga to take the Dragon Ball Super Broly route. In the manga, the events of the Broly movies weren't adapted, except they were summarized in a few pages in the middle of one chapter. This kept the plot fresh and allowed events to move directly into the Moro arc without time being spent retelling a story everyone had already seen in movie format. Naturally, this led me to assume that the manga may take the same approach regarding the superhero story, that it would be summarized in a few pages and would quickly move on to the next story yet to be told, as it did with Broly. This approach meant fans of the series could quickly move on to the new unseen content that kept the series fresh and exciting every month, and many readers would highly anticipate the upcoming chapters. But this was not what happened. Instead of opting to go with the approach of what they did with the Broly movie, the decision was made to do a complete retelling of the superhero movie but in manga form. This was met with lots of skepticism, and rightfully so, as this decision would prove to be highly detrimental in the long run. What dulled interest in the manga in the first few years of its run was that the anime was ahead of it and had already covered the story being told. That and the fact that many individuals have anime as their preferred form of ingesting a story over reading manga, it left many with little reason to ever read the manga to begin with. That's why the interest in the manga grew substantially upon the anime's ending, as it forced anime-only watchers to turn to the manga if they wanted to continue to follow the story of Dragon Ball Super. The very fact of if the content is new and fresh heavily dictates if someone chooses to consume that content, because many would ask, why is it worth reading a story if you've already seen it animated? It would be safe to say that almost anyone who actively reads Dragon Ball Super Manga most likely also saw the Dragon Ball Super Superhero movie as an animated film, has a far greater reach than a manga does. Many who have seen the movie probably never even looked at the Dragon Ball Super Manga, as large quantities of audiences opt to remain anime only. Rehashed content in and of itself is a risky option to take, as people don't want to constantly consume the same story repeatedly, with only minute changes being their reasoning for doing so. So the Dragon Ball Super anime suffered greatly in its first two arcs by opting to rehash the Battle of Gods and Resurrection F movies. People had already seen that very same content content in a superior movie version. From a writing perspective, it makes sense to tell all your stories and avoid skipping over anything to maintain continuity and keep everything together in the same medium for a consumer's seamless experience. But from a consumer perspective, why would they maintain interest in a story they've already experienced in a less exciting and unpreferred method by their taste? If that story has already been told in a spectacular manner like a theatrical movie, it will kill interest as people already know what's going to happen. They've seen it already and can access the full story at any moment in time instead of having to wait a month for the arrival of a new manga chapter to see what happens next. Assume this perspective of the situation. If you just emerged from the movie theater, having just finished watching Dragon Ball Super Superhero with a stellar animation, inspiring soundtrack, and powerful voice acting, as a casual anime consumer, why would you want to go home and read the same story with similar paneling, similar dialogue, with minimal differences in the story being told? Many non-hardcore fans would consider it a waste of time. The hardcore fans who do consume both forms of media will still do so, but with an incredible lack of interest compared to what they would have had when they watched the movie or were reading a brand new chapter featuring a fresh new story of content they hadn't yet seen. The Guerrilla Arc had theories and discussions happening rampantly leading up to each chapter's release on a monthly basis, and there was a distinct and noticeable drop-off in the excitement and community involvement once the superhero arc in the manga began. It didn't start off entirely bad, as many people remained optimistic for new content and some interesting changes that could be made in that manga adaptation. It started off pleasant with a few chapters featuring Goten and Trunks acting out as superheroes and serving as a small prequel story setting up the events of Dragon Ball Super Superhero, but any excitement this story generated proved to be very brief and short-lived. One thing that can make a retelling worth watching is added content and significant differences, neither of which the manga version of events had. It did include a prelude of Trunks and Goten in the first few chapters, but it quickly ended up in movie territory with shocking similarities. There were minute differences here and there, such as with Krillin's involvement, but these changes were incredibly minuscule and not enough to warrant consuming this version of events over the movie due to the incredible similarities. One thing that made the manga worth reading when compared to the Dragon Ball Super anime was there were many changes and differences in the arcs. Though they told the same overarching story, the substance was often different, just how Goku achieved Ultra Instinct, or when Gohan fought Kefla in the manga instead of Goku as he did in the anime. This made the manga much more interesting as the significant changes allowed individuals to compare and contrast each version of events side by side to determine the superior adaptation and whichever one they liked better. But the manga version of events was extremely similar, even down to the panels being very comparable to the movies and the dialogue being virtually unchanged. Of course, we can cherry pick minute differences that some people would attempt to argue makes the whole thing worth reading, but I'm assuming the perspective of the vast majority of the fan base had in response to the superhero adaptation in the manga. The Goten and Trunks prelude to the story ended with Chapter 90, which released in February of 2023, and the manga started adapting the events where the movie began in Chapter 91, which released the very next month in March. Chapter 91 would prove to be the beginning of the horrible stretch and massive lack of interest from fans, and this would last the rest of the calendar year. From March until December, Chapter 91 to Chapter 100, 10% of the series to this point was spent retelling a movie that had just come out in the summer of 2022, less than a year prior. Many may assume that there wasn't a lack of interest or discussion surrounding the manga during this time period, as people were still discussing any minute differences in the manga art compared to the movie art, among other things, but this was soon proved to not be the case as the retelling finally concluded. Hey, real fast, if you're enjoying the video so far, please consider hitting the like button and the subscribe button, as it helps the video grow and it helps my channel grow. Over the last few chapters of the retelling, I began to see more discussions from people questioning if the next chapter is where it could finally end. And when discovering it wasn't, I saw the disappointment become apparent. It really started to become clear at the end of the year just how growing the wait for new content had been. There had been less and less discussion as each month went on. Instead of people discussing and asking what may occur next chapter, it became, how much content of the movie will this chapter cover, and will this chapter be the one where the retelling finally ends? Each month had become a waiting game for this retelling to conclude and new material to begin. Typically, when leaks for the new chapter would come out, Dragon Ball Super would begin trending as people were reacting to the exciting new content and spoilers in the days leading up to the chapter's official release. But none of that was present here. No trending on Twitter, no exciting predictions and discussions of what may transpire, just what felt like an endless, grueling, and exhausting waiting game. This became even more evident as Chapter 100 was celebrated, not for being a milestone for the series, but for marking the conclusion of the Cell Max vs Beast Gohan fight. This stretch reminded me of when the Dragon Ball Super anime was rehashing content and everyone turned to the manga to see the new content stemming from the Universe 6 arc, which the manga reached before the anime did. But the true defining moment of realizing how bad and grueling things had become for the manga in 2023 became evident with Chapter 102. This was the chapter that marked Ultra Instinct Goku fighting Beast Gohan, and when this plot point was revealed and the leaks were online, the excitement for the series that had been absent for over an entire year finally returned. Just like that, Dragon Ball was trending once again. Tons of discussions were being had over finally getting new content. People were exclaiming and celebrating that this was the most excited they had been for the manga in years. This difference in energy was all due to the simple difference between new and rehashed content. The fact that fans are in a state of waiting for an arc to end instead of enjoying what's happening in the moment isn't a state you want your product to be in. But yet, that's where Dragon Ball Super has spent so much of its time over the years with this issue of rehashing content, whether it be in the anime or the manga. The energy from previous years was finally back, and people were instantly discussing the upcoming manga chapters and waiting in excitement to see what was coming next. Twitter was once again flooded with leaks from the upcoming chapter, and discussions regarding the material were happening with excitement and interest once again. The simple decision to rehash a story that had already been told had put Dragon Ball Super in a state of purgatory, making it plagued by disinterest for the better part of an entire calendar year. But yet, with one little change in the arrival of new content, it showed how detrimental the retelling seemed to be and how exciting Dragon Ball can be when it actually gives something for fans to be excited for. 2023 was undoubtedly an incredibly rough year for the series. The most exciting thing that happened for the series in the year wasn't what was happening in the manga, but arguably the announcement of Dragon Ball Sparking Zero or of Dragon Ball Daima. Patiently waiting for an arc to end and having no interest in reading the monthly chapters due to being able to access its movie counterpart was a rough place to be as a Dragon Ball fan. The new content on Beerus' planet following the Beast Gohan vs Cell Max conclusion proved to be incredibly exciting, and it caught me off guard with just how different the reception was of those chapters compared to the previous 10. We had already been aware of the sad state the manga was in with people's overall lack of interest in the product, but seeing the absolutely massive difference in reaction and reception that came with the post-superhero movie chapters really began to put things in perspective and made me realize that 2023 was an even rougher year for the series than I initially perceived it to be. Some of you out there may have liked the superhero retelling in the manga, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it was a one-to-one readaptation of the movie with very minuscule differences, and to many people, that wasn't worth readapting the entire movie and wasting an entire year doing so. Some could argue that it was decided to do that so Toyotaro and Toriyama could prepare new stories for the future, but we don't know for sure. But what we can definitely be sure of is how exciting the manga is now compared to how it was last year, with the new events and content taking place on Beerus' planet. The reception to it versus the manga chapters last year retelling the superhero events are almost night and day. To go from people just waiting for an arc to end to being really exciting to see what happens next chapter is a huge leap to make, and it displays the massive lack of interest people had in the product last year. But what we can rejoice about now, even though the manga is on hiatus, and if/when it returns, we know we'll be getting new and exciting content with Toyotaro at the helm following Toriyama's passing. There are seeds already planted for future stories to come, such as with Black Frieza. But regardless of future stories yet to come, it truly is exciting to see people excited about the series yet again, because the monthly and weekly discussions for upcoming chapters are some of the most fun things as a Dragon Ball fan. It's always exciting to see people's predictions, excitement, and thoughts on a new chapter, and for what they think will come next. As a fan of Dragon Ball, I never want the manga to be in a spot where people aren't excited for the upcoming chapters, and are only using it as a countdown to determine when that arc will end. Dragon Ball Super has had an issue for years with rehashing content in both the anime and the manga, and it usually doesn't go over well. And I'm sure the vast majority of fans would say that they don't want that to happen again. The end of the retelling of the superhero arc and new content on the horizon, fans now have a reason to be excited for the Dragon Ball Super manga once again. My name is Champusard. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and hitting the subscribe button, as it helps the video grow and it helps my channel grow here on YouTube. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time.